And we have CJ to thank for the DJ expertise.
We had a chance to pick our own song, so I felt like Regulate would be a good one for a regulatory panel.
Very good choice.
Yeah, regulate away. So really excited for this panel, and congratulations to Swan. This is an amazing event, so thank you for putting this together. It's not easy your first year, and they killed it, so really proud of them and happy to be here. So we'll kind of go over a few different topics. First we'll dig into kind of the main question, right? Will DC kill Bitcoin or attempt to? And then we'll go into, I think, elections, and then a little bit national security, and then the hot topic right now, FTX and all of that, what that trickle-down effect will be. So let's start with, will regulations kill Bitcoin? Will DC try to kill Bitcoin? What do you think, Matt? You had some good thoughts.
I think the short answer is no, but I think it's like on a spectrum, right? So killing Bitcoin, it's not really possible. They can make it more difficult. And the question is, are we in an environment where the policymakers' regulatory sort of framework is going to lead to more restrictive access to Bitcoin in certain contexts? And that's kind of the debate we have, right? So we have sort of two basic systems that provide the regulatory authorities' ability to do sort of surveillance and choke point on different networks. In the financial system, they have both choke point ability and panopticon ability, right? And the internet, they only really have panopticon abilities. And the whole game in regulatory space is to try to pull Bitcoin from the sort of digital world, internet, where things can be monitored but very hard to restrict, and bring it into the financial world, where you can sort of box it up. And that is the battle between where in that sort of boundary is sort of the line of control going to be established, and where those goalposts can be moved sort of left and right. And so Bitcoin, I think, is sort of going into the national security apparatus in sort of different aspects. Some folks who first confront Bitcoin do it from a very narrow remit, where their job is to do illicit finance, is to sort of target sanctions sort of evasion, and so that's their only experience with Bitcoin for years. Of course, they're going to have sort of a latent negative sort of feeling towards it, but I think there's other folks in the national security apparatus that are coming around to the larger strategic benefits of Bitcoin to the United States, and that's kind of where things currently lie, and that's sort of a debate that's happening internal in different bureaucracies. There's no sort of amorphous blob that just makes a unified decision in the U.S. government. They all have different interests, different bureaucratic sort of authorities, and that's kind of where the sort of battle's going to take place in the next few years.
Hailey, what do you think? What have you seen?
When you were speaking, I guess what I was thinking is based on some of the things we've seen this week, that in a way, I think there's an example of regulation actually helping Bitcoin, because regulation can prevent some of the things that are not Bitcoin related that have been happening. And but part of that, and I think all of our jobs sort of involve that education component of drawing the line of what is Bitcoin, what is DeFi, and making sure that regulation is nuanced and well-informed. So, the question is interesting, because Bitcoin came out with libertarian ideals sort of to get away from government interference and intermediaries and banks. But we're also seeing examples where there's centralized companies that are doing harm because they're sort of skirting around the regulation. So my answer would be that regulation might actually be good for Bitcoin in the long term.
I think it's even funnier than that, because, like Matt said, we think of the government as a blob sometimes, but it's really got so many arms and legs. It's really and it's an evolving animal. We just had elections, obviously. Some of you voted for people that you liked, and some people won and some people didn't. We still don't know on some of the elections, right? Which is hilarious. So every couple years, anybody that's a Bitcoin advocate has got to speak to a new audience. We've got to say, hey, new person, new staff, it's your first time in DC, and we have to get to those people before the crypto shills get to them, before the monkey JPEG retards go out there and try to sell them stuff. We've got to explain why Bitcoin's better, why Bitcoin's the best, and that's what we do. And I think that's so there's always going to have to be people on the Bitcoin maxi side or whatever on the gas pedal pushing to inform as many people from the bottom level of what is Bitcoin, and then sometimes for people that are even older to say what is money, and then kind of merging those together to say how should we be involved. But one good thing about this week is we know that Sam is not going to be in Congress testifying against Bitcoin anytime soon, so that's great, actually. So I think it's a net positive.
It's been a big week. I mean, elections. I think a lot of people were expecting a red wave, right? And it was a wave, but not a tidal wave, right? So we'll have to figure out, a strategy that's more bipartisan still for the next couple of years at least. And I think that's really important, right? We have an opportunity with very humbled kind of incumbents, and I think a lot of people are on edge. Are they going to make it another term to kind of present an olive branch, right? And so I think it's really important to still teach both sides of the aisle and not pick a winner or loser. I think, there's this theory of moving away from left versus right, and we're starting to see, CBDCs around the world. So is it going to be more of a party of centralization versus a decentralized party? And thinking of things kind of very much higher level order, I think will serve us well in the long run, and really, putting principles before personalities type thing, where we're really focused on the values and the ethos of Bitcoin and how that will help America win, frankly. I think we're mostly Americans in here, right? So I would love America to stay ahead of China and some other countries as well. So with that said, on the national security front, that's kind of related to mining sometimes and grid security. Would love to dive into national security, because I think as we see more CBDCs like the digital yuan, let's say China starts forgiving debt in Africa, but they have to settle their payments on the digital yuan, right? Well, what does that look for the world? And so really, are we looking at more of a higher level situation here? And I would love to hear your thoughts on that, Matt, and everyone else on the panel.
Yeah, certainly the defining kind of geopolitical conflict is between the United States and China. And China has a pretty ambitious sort of strategy to expand their sphere of influence and to use sort of authoritarian digital tools to do that. And they have weaponized the dollar to do Belt and Road Initiative style investments throughout the Eurasian periphery and Africa to sort of spread influence. And on the back of that, they have sort of pushed their model for digital totalitarian style governments, where Huawei, 5G, ZTE, their sort of AI surveillance engine sort of goes into those countries, and their DCEP, the sort of digital yuan, is sort of part of that sort of authoritarianism as a service package, which for certain governments around the world is an attractive sort of all-in-one subscription model you can get from the Chinese. And what is the US answer to that? Is it going to be an equivalent version of that, just sort of packaged up with US tech? I don't think we're going to out-totalitarian the sort of the Chinese model. So what is our alternative? Well, here's an emerging open system that's more in alignment with the US values and actually is being adopted organically by the people in a lot of those countries and is sort of acting as a bulwark against sort of that Chinese ambition. And so to a certain extent that Bitcoin and sort of these dollar-based stablecoins adoption in these countries can sort of help inoculate and act as a bulwark against Chinese kind of digital colonization, is really reinforces U.S. interests. And so I think that is slowly seeping into the national security bureaucracy as part of great power competition. It's not made its way into policy yet, but I think there's growing recognition that is a potential national security benefit for Bitcoin around the world.
Yeah, I would just add that I think the U.S. government does see value in Bitcoin, and I think that if they can figure out how to use that technology in a way that benefits innovation here and not embracing some of the other country values that we're talking about, that there is a way that the technology that already exists allows there to be a good balance of financial privacy and staying competitive in the market.
Yeah, and that competition is really key because America has been a free market to a lot of degrees, and it's attracted people from all over the world. People want to go to college here, they want to get engineering degrees here, they want to be doctors here. America's been the best place to be wealthy in the world for a really long time. And when we talk to politicians in DC, it's the thing that we always say is like, we can't lose these people, because not only is the effect of their wealth going to be big and their success and the push that they're making into our economy, but we don't want to push those people and their families and their future generations of wealth as Bitcoiners, because we always think long term, think about our kids, think about our grandkids and how much Bitcoin they're going to have and what it's going to be worth. We don't want them going to some mid-level wacky country, some banana republic, and buying F-16s or something like that and flying them into Florida. So we want to have all that action here, and that's the big thing. So you kind of have to, when we're talking to the politicians, it's always like you have to dangle that carrot to get them to say, hey, this could be good for my state. And the people that are, I mean, effectively using that, like Cynthia Lummis, they become entrenched in the same way DeSantis is fairly entrenched in Florida, and they become part of the state identity. And I think whether it's Texas or Wyoming or whatever, some of the freer states are attracting a lot of mental capital right now. And we have that example, and to show the politicians that we want America and the American dollar and Bitcoin to be like the freedom skis that they can stand on and get down the hill in a good way.
And one thing I wanted to add is from the Biden executive order, and that feels like years ago, that was 6 months ago or so, I was hopeful that the regulatory agencies that he sort of said put out reports, do research, would really be weighing the negatives and positives of Bitcoin specifically. And from what I've seen, it doesn't feel that way, but I think that wheels are turning, and that executive order put in motion an idea that we do need to stay competitive, and part of that in the United States has always been technology and innovation, and the financial system's no different. So I think that Bitcoin continues to sort of stand on its own in the chaotic world we're seeing this week and in this year. And I really hope that the benefits and the ways that we can embrace regulation and jobs here in the United States and creating this technology here will continue to grow.
Yeah, it's really amazing when I think most of us spend time in DC, and probably more than each of us want to be frank. But Matt's involved with the Bitcoin Policy Institute. He's a fellow there. That's an amazing group. Hailey works, with companies that are in Bitcoin, and CJ and I are part of the Bitcoin Today Coalition, which is a C4, so we do a lot of advocacy and education. You really have to separate. There's Bitcoin, and then there's kind of like everything else, right? And the Immaculate Conception, all of these factors, the open source aspect, that there's no censorship resistance, right? Like those things, you kind of have to tell a story to explain. And so it's been interesting spending time there, and I actually go back next week, I think meeting with about 25 different offices and focusing really heavily on mining. So I would love to hear, what we think about kind of the SEC. Gensler's said some interesting things about, mining needing to be green, and I know he put out a video today, so I'd love your thoughts first, Hailey, on that, and then Matt on mining and national security.
Yeah, the SEC's video today, I retweeted and just said, maybe he shouldn't be on some PR roadshow and actually solve some of the issues that are going on in this space, because it just feels like he's, sort of used...
But they got Kim Kardashian, so there you go, right?
Took her down.
Targets.
So, the thing I'll say is the SEC and the CFTC have, as closely as explicitly possible, agreed that Bitcoin is not a security and it's a commodity. And I think that says a lot, because the SEC is not willing to let most of the projects in the space out of their jurisdiction. I think that the SEC really needs to make clear how Bitcoin companies that only focus on Bitcoin and aren't dealing with these other altcoins and that are likely securities, how they can function in this space without being pulled down because of it. It's been frustrating, because I know that this is a Bitcoin conference, but platforms that do list these other tokens that are likely securities, there are paths forward. And his video today was complaining about the lack of disclosure and the financial harm that's happening because of it. Well, the SEC has the tools to make it clear how other projects should be registering and disclosing things, so that the SEC has more insight into what's going on and to actually prevent the things that are happening this week, and not the Kim Kardashian touting of the world.
Well, one thing that's important for people to realize is that, once again, there's so many layers to this regulation, so many layers to the government, whether it's the House, the Senate, the CFTC, the SEC, the Treasury, Federal Reserve. Everybody has a desire to have more power than they have, right? But one of the easiest ways to catch somebody is to wait till they break everything, fall flat on their face, and have no resources to defend themselves. So what we're seeing in certain cases where they go after some companies, whether it doesn't matter what branch it is, they go after somebody that has a big pile of resources. That lawsuit takes years and years and years. Whereas with FTX, there's a potential that any sort of action could resolve itself very quickly because they've effectively broken and lost everything, and Sam's laying bleeding on the floor in his beanbag. So I think that's something that everybody needs to understand as well, that, that, like Hailey said earlier, and this is like, for libertarians, this is like hard to admit, sometimes having rules allows you to operate more efficiently.
Well,
that's clear.
And actually prevent consumer harm, right? So I agree with you. Some of these agencies like to go after things once it's easier to take down. But if their charge is actually preventing consumer harm or national security, you go after it in a more proactive way. And that's, I think, what's the most frustrating to me is you're not preventing much.
Yeah, and on the mining thing, just really quick, we talk about like there's all these theories about, if we have nuclear plants and what's a 51% attack cost and at some point, there is definitely going to be a benefit to having hash rate inside your country. I don't know how many foreign nationals or NSA agents we have out here, but it is good to have Bitcoin mining in America. I think we're having great conversations with people, especially in rural states where there might be some excess power and not enough people to distribute it across, or not enough businesses. And you have the Bitcoin miners like, yo, I'll take it. I'll take the power. Thank you. And it's great. It's a great conversation. And that's been working really well, because a lot of times once again, the power struggle between the East Coast, the West Coast, the Democrats, the Republicans, big states, small states, there's all these different layers that interact, and we can sort of all agree that more economic activity in your state is good for you, Senator, right? So.
The other thing I'll add is, in terms of like the order of priority, it seems stablecoins on the top of the list. It's a dollar substitute, and it's a kind of a novel form of a crypto euro dollar that trades in an offshore market that, historically, in the sort of history of the evolution of the monetary system, has always created a lot of angst at the Fed and in the Treasury Department, and has created, sort of crises in the offshore dollar system that require sort of periodic bailouts, swap lines to our allies, and sort of that's like sort of an aspect of sort of the global dollar system that has generated a lot of instability. And I think that is where sort of the near-term sort of regulatory priority is going to be focused on stablecoins, and how, to what extent are they regulated, to what extent do they have to be fully reserved, do they get access to the Fed's sort of discount window, do they get access to Fed master accounts? Like, those are kind of like the technical plumbing issues associated with stablecoins in particular. And and then the security sort of regime, how do we apply these sorts of rules to these novel tokens? And then Bitcoin is just there, right? It's actually kind of simple from a regulatory perspective. And the question of mining is really just sort of outside of the national security space to a certain extent. I mean, these sort of theoretical arguments and the energy FUD, but from like hardcore national security concerns, the mining thing is not really on top of the list. And in fact, I think there's like a recent recognition that there's a lot of stranded assets, energy assets, that our adversaries have spent a lot of money on building in countries around the world, like Africa, that are sort of like vanity projects that never got connection to like local towns and villages. And hey, Americans become really expert at mining Bitcoin, are deploying capital to essentially mine at these sort of stranded Chinese hydro dams in Africa, and like convince like the local officials, like, hey, this is actually a good thing, and you can monetize this asset. You can build out the interconnection to local villages, and sort of spread soft power, right? So I think there's that's like still a nascent idea, but there's a story there, right, that I think over time gets more compelling. But on the other hand, there's going to be potential for in a crisis environment, right? They look for the tools to sort of stop the crisis. And I think it's incumbent on Bitcoin developers, like things like Stratum V2 is going to be very important, right? To improve the censorship resistance of the network, right? I think we shouldn't just rely entirely on education, political advocacy. We should rely on building tools that can provide those capabilities, and focus on that, to give people as much privacy and capability out of the network.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And mining adds to, the resiliency of the grid. And there's so much, 40% stranded power usually, right, in the world? I think it's 40 or 60. Pretty sure it's 40. Correct me if I'm wrong. Sorry if I got that wrong. But we've got, a few minutes left, so we might as well dig into the juicy stuff. Let's go FTX. How do you think that's going to play out? Long-term implications, short-term. Is it a win for Bitcoin in the long run? I think it's going to be more painful in the short term, but I think win in the long run.
Well, great things come out of pain sometimes. All of us went through growing pains when we were in puberty to get to our full adult height. So I think in that same sense right now, we're seeing that downward pressure on the price because there's obviously a lot of FUD, there's a lot of negativity. The whole crypto space broadly is being kind of shot in the knee, kicked in the nuts, and punched in the gut all at the same time. But the good thing is that all those people that have bought monkey JPEGs and altcoins with dogs on them or whatever, those people could all potentially be Bitcoiners, right? And so we could in a bullish scenario have all those people start just buying. And if BlockFi and these other people aren't allowing shorting to happen on the CME because there just isn't the liquidity to short, then it's up only and over time, and that's what we're all looking for.
Yeah, so I personally feel like it's too early to celebrate. I'm certainly not in a celebratory mood this week, but in part it's because I do represent a lot of companies in the space, and the collateral damage that is happening from this week's activities is going to be lasting, and I don't think that we've felt sort of all the pain in terms of the Bitcoin price or what it means for regulation. So the education continues in a way, but I've been in the space since 2013, and 99% of my portfolio is Bitcoin. I'm a very strong advocate for sort of Bitcoin only, unless there's something that sparks my interest and I'm sort of playing around with it on a platform. And I think that more people will understand that positioning because there's a lot of noise in the industry. An industry like this, there's something like Bitcoin that's created and people go running with it, and they use that as money-making scams and there's a fly. Money-making scams and get it, kill it. So I guess that's all to say. He got it. Wow, that deserves a
Don't clap for that. That's weird. That's super weird.
Sniper.
That's awesome. Anyways, I think long term this will be a positive. It just means that we have still a long way to go. We're still very early, and I think that a lot of the messaging that has come across from Bitcoiners, like self-custody and Bitcoin only, I mean, there is a bit of reason behind that.
Yeah, and I think that's, to me, like the biggest takeaway is drawing the line more clearly and more vocally between Bitcoin and crypto, not because of any sort of malevolence, but just out of consumer protection, right? Like, I think the obvious lesson of SBF is that he fooled a lot of people. He fooled a lot of the smart money. And if the smartest money on the street supposedly got completely wrecked, like, what could you imagine like the retail investor in that environment? And I think this is just like repeating the mantra over and over again. It sounds like you're a broken record, but like eventually it breaks through, and like the handful of people that you save along the way can make a difference. And I think it's just a matter of making that argument a little bit more definitively in those educational contexts with regulators, and making it very clear like this is kind of a told you so moment from the Bitcoin community, and this is why the regulatory environment that folks like SBF were pushing is maybe not the right way to go, and this needs to be a much more clearly defined kind of distinction.
I was just going to say, maybe the magnitude of harm and the larger individuals that were harmed this week and that will continue to come to light will make the message even louder than it would, unfortunately, if it had just been, individual retail consumers. That's not how it should be, but I think that's how it will play out. And, we'll all be in DC working our asses off for a long time.
Yeah, pain is the greatest teacher, and we're not giving up on education. So we hope you all join in that effort, especially locally. I think it's very important as well. So we can all have an impact and go out there and teach. And maybe don't rub salt in the wound. Some people are, a lot of us have learned through pain as well. So help your friends and family see the light is kind of the goal here. But thank you so much, and thank you everyone for coming up, and enjoy.
Thank you.